In the quiet, dimly lit depths of the Galactic station, Felnar could barely make out the figure across the table. A thin mist hung around them, and his antennae twitched, pulling in the faint smell of smoke and dust, a smell he'd come to associate with one species alone. "Human," he muttered, trying to keep his voice steady. The man across from him was as rugged as the tales. Broad-shouldered, his eyes glinted with a fierce, strange light like embers waiting to spark. His name was Carson, though the other stories had called him the Red Fire. "Yeah," Carson replied, taking a slow sip of the amber liquid in his glass. "You want a story, Felnar?" Felnar leaned in, unable to help himself. His species, the Orani, were meticulous gatherers of knowledge. They recorded legends, unraveling them one story at a time. For years, Felnar had heard of the humans, their strength, their grit. But never before had he sat across from one, breathing in the scent of a race whispered about throughout the cosmos. "Tell me," Felnar replied, a quiver in his voice. "Tell me about Stellan's stand." Carson's face darkened. For a moment Felnar thought he might refuse, but then the human leaned back, the glint in his eye deepening. When he finally spoke, his voice was like gravel, each word falling like stone on Felnar's mind. "Stellan," Carson began, "wasn't like other people. Had a knack for seeing straight through to the heart of things, whether it was fixing old engines or calming squabbles on board." He paused, eyes drifting off as if seeing some distant memory. But what he really loved, protecting the people he cared about. That's why he was there, why he fought when everyone else had given up. Felnar's throat tightened as he listened. He had read about Stellan's stand, a desperate battle on the edge of the known universe. Yet he hadn't expected to hear it from one who had been there. "What happened?" Felnar whispered. "Pirates. We called them Void Reapers," Carson said, his jaw tight. "Savage, merciless, faster than any ship we'd seen. They came out of nowhere, tore through our defenses. They weren't there to take prisoners." Carson fell silent, his fingers tightening around his glass. "We'd evacuated everyone who couldn't fight," Carson continued, his voice hardening. "Most of our fighters were outnumbered 10-1, but Stellan, he looked Felnar dead in the eye. He didn't flinch. He was the one who rallied us, stood at the forefront, staring down the barrel of the enemy's weapons." Felnar's scales prickled. He knew what was coming, but felt an almost desperate need to hear it all the same. The humans had come to be known across the stars for their stubborn, relentless courage. Tales spread of them not just as a species, but as legends like the one before him. What did he do?" Carson took a deep breath, eyes reflecting both pride and pain. Stellan hacked into the engine core. Rig it to explode, but he stayed behind to make sure everyone got out. I was the last one on the escape pod. I'll never forget his face as he held that door, sealing us in, forcing us to leave him. His last words were, "Take him home, Carson. That's an order." Felnar's heart raced, his scales shifting slightly as he absorbed the weight of the story. He'd read 1,000 tales, but never one that felt so alive. He had heard that humans often saw death as a companion, a shadow that could be outrun or faced with open defiance. This was the embodiment of it. "And then?" Felnar asked, barely managing a whisper. Carson's expression shifted, his gaze intense. "We watched as the Void Reapers stormed the bridge. They didn't know he was waiting. Stellan went down, his finger on the detonator, taking their entire fleet with him." There was silence, thick as the void. Felnar's antennae trembled, and for a moment he was transported, seeing Stellan, alone on that bridge, staring down death and refusing to yield. He understood now why the humans were feared and respected. It was more than their technology, their firepower. It was this raw, unyielding will to protect at any cost. "And you carry on," Felnar said softly, with his memory. Carson's gaze darkened. "It's more than that. Stellan taught me something all humans carry with them. We call it the Ember. It's that spark, that part of us that can't stand down, even when the odds are against us. The Ember is what makes us who we are." Felnar shivered, sensing the quiet fire in Carson's voice. The Ember. It was more than a belief, it was a way of life. It was why humans became tales whispered across galaxies, why no species dared provoke them without due cause. "Another one, if you will," Felnar said, feeling an almost painful need to understand this thing they carried. "Tell me about Cray. I heard he once," Felnar hesitated, feeling the weight of the words, "took down an entire armada." Carson's mouth curved into a bittersweet smile. "Ah, Cray. Yeah, he was another one. Brilliant strategist, a bit of a madman, if you ask me," he chuckled, but the sound was somber. "The Keldron Alliance, you heard of them. They were on the move, swallowing territories whole. Their warships were the best. But Cray was smarter. He set to trap a decoy fleet that led them right into the Andari Nebula, a place where their radar went blind. Felnar's jaw dropped. The Keldron were infamous for their ruthlessness, feared throughout the galaxy. And this one human had taken them down. How? Timing, Carson said, leaning forward, his eyes blazing with that ember once more. He had us waiting, every ship cloaked in the nebulous fog. The Keldron couldn't see us, but we could see them. When they finally realized what was happening, Cray was already aboard their flagship. A Felnar was at the edge of his seat, unable to imagine the boldness, the audacity of it. He boarded their flagship? Alone? Carson nodded, his voice filled with pride, with nothing but his wits and a single blade. And he fought his way through until he reached their bridge. And when he got there, he cut their commander down, right in front of their entire fleet. They scattered after that, too afraid to engage any further. Felnar's chest tightened as he imagined it, a lone human, surrounded by the enemy, armed with nothing but a blade and unshakable resolve. It was almost impossible to believe, yet he knew Carson was telling the truth. These were the stories that kept entire star systems on guard, reminding them of the one species that could turn the tide in an instant. Carson's voice softened, and Felnar saw a flicker of grief in his eyes. Cray didn't make it back that day. He knew what he was signing up for. We found his body later, resting near the helm. But the Keldron Alliance hasn't made a single move toward human space since. The silence that followed was thick, heavy. Felnar let the weight of it settle, feeling the impact of these tales with a depth he hadn't known was possible. These humans were more than warriors. They were the embodiment of a fierce spirit that refused to be extinguished, a spark that could burn through any darkness. Tell me, Carson, Felnar said after a long pause, his voice almost a whisper. What is it that drives you to such extremes? Carson took a long breath, his gaze far away, as if looking beyond the stars. We come from a place filled with struggles, Felnar. Every human grows up hearing stories of survival, resilience. We know loss, we know pain. But we also know hope. It's part of us, and when we fight, it's not just for survival. It's for the chance to build something better, to protect what we love. The words hung in the air, wrapping around Felnar like an embrace. He felt an unexpected well of respect, even admiration. He had heard countless tales across the galaxies, but none had resonated like this. None had made him feel the way these humans did, stirring a desire to honor their sacrifices, to record their legends so they would never be forgotten. Thank you, Carson, Felnar said, his voice thick. I will carry these stories as you carry the Ember. I swear it. Carson offered him a sad, knowing smile, his eyes dimmed by the weight of memories. Good. Just make sure to tell them the way they happen. We're not heroes, Felnar. We're just people who care. But as Felnar stood, feeling the stories blaze within him, he knew it was more than that. These humans were legends because they chose to be. They carried their ember, their unbreakable spark, and passed it on to those who would listen. As Felnar stepped out into the cold corridors of the station, he glanced back one last time at the figure seated in the shadows. Carson sat there, quiet, unassuming, with a strength that was as boundless as the stars themselves. And in that moment, Felnar understood. The humans might not see themselves as heroes, but to the rest of the galaxy they were beacons of hope, protectors, and the quiet, fierce hearts that would burn against the dark.